Turkey's finance minister says that his government is in the final stages of putting together a new stimulus package as the lira hits yet another fresh low against the dollar. Simone Foxman has more on this. So Simone, what can we expect from this new plan?
Well, Nuruddin Nabati, the finance minister there, saying that this plan will be the equivalent of about $2.7 billion currently, no less than 50 billion liras. And this is really meant to support the expansion of cheap or relatively cheap loans for businesses. A key complaint for the private sector has been that despite the fact that we have extraordinarily low benchmark interest rates, they're still paying substantially more to borrow from banks. So the equivalent of about 20.5% when we're looking at a benchmark interest rate of about 12% currently. We have seen those rates come down a little bit in expectation of this new potential plan. But the idea, again, being that Turkey would be juicing the economy, really pushing money into the private sector, keeping that GDP growth high, even as we have this enormous inflation. However, there is the risk that this new plan could only exacerbate some of that inflation, put increasing pressure on Turkey's government on the kind of resources it has in its reserves. That said, we're kind of weighing these things back and forth as we look not just ahead to the announcement of this plan, but to elections that we'll need to see by the middle of next year.
And then in Lebanon, Parliament passed a 2022 budget as the country's banks faced protests. I was on the ground there on holiday a couple of weeks ago, and we saw some of the banks getting stormed by depositors wanting their money out. What's the state of play?
Yeah, those banks heists actually had shut down banks for over a week, really, and they've only partially reopened yesterday. So we saw those crowds continuing to form. Banks just saying the situation is so risky for its employees that they can't reopen fully, and so there's still crowds hanging out around ATMs. I guess one positive thing is that we did see the passage of this 2022 budget. That is a key demand by the IMF. IMF says you need to pass a budget in order for even the possibility to get the IMF aid that Lebanon so deeply desires. That said, the IMF also said last week that the progress of reforms in Lebanon have been very slow. So a really tragic outlook, tragic situation on the ground, and you feel for those people who run into those banks and say, I just want my money out.
Yeah, and the Lebanese lira, of course, continues to depreciate in the face of the behemoth king dollar. What about the owners of Dubai-based gems? Let's talk about some of the corporate news, because basically this is an education provider and they are considering to sell their stake, according to Bloomberg sources, and it could come at quite a hefty ticket fee.
Yeah, a valuation of $6 billion potentially, sources tell us. So Sonny Varkey, he's one of the main owners. He was the founder of the current GEMS Education. His family has owned this business and the predecessor business for about 60 years. CVC Capital Partners, also a private equity owner there. We understand that those two owners are considering selling off their majority stake to ideally private equity firms, financial sponsors, or most likely Middle East sovereign wealth funds. That's the ideal goal. If not, if they can't sell that way, there could be the potential for an IPO. Add the normal caveats here. All this may not happen and whatnot, but this is one of the world's largest private school operators, and so whatever we're looking at a big deal at a time when education assets are actually one of these potentially value plays in a turbulent market.